why don't we start out by defining who are the caregivers in a workplace? So we often think of moms with toddlers, right? But it's much more than that. Jennifer, can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely, so much more than that. And we've heard stories already from our speakers today of the different types of caregiving that they're offering. But recent Harvard Business School research says that 73% of employees have some sort of caregiving responsibilities. So that could be anything from a mom with a toddler. It could be someone who's taking care of an elderly parent. There are many of us who are in between in that sandwich generation who are caring for both. And about 23% of employed people are in that sandwich generation. So we have a wide variety of caregivers, and one thing that we really try to emphasize in our work is that it's not just women that are caregivers. We are trying to normalize men as caregivers, whether that's being a more egalitarian parent and being a true partner with their spouse, or caring for their elderly parents, a sibling, or their own spouse as they become ill over time.
Great, that's helpful. And so for many people, work feels different after you have kids or you start becoming a caregiver, right? Your priorities and your ambitions and your availability shift. Addie, can you talk about the push and pull between work and caregiving and how it affects our careers, and how, if it's possible, how it's possible to continue having a fulfilling career while also being a good caregiver?
Just the way you explained it sounds complex. And I think that's
Just figure it all out for us with your Addie things.
Well, I've been trying to figure out for a while now. So around 62% of all employees worldwide have taken a career break. And it's not going away anytime soon. And there are all different kinds of reasons why people take breaks. Sometimes it's a luxury, you have the choice to. Other times when you look at how much money you're making and how much the child care is, which we heard in the other room is astronomical, you wonder, should I be taking care of the person I love versus some stranger when I might be breaking even or losing money on the deal? So certainly that was the case when I had my first daughter and started my first company in the 90s. So there's definitely this push and pull, and priorities change. I know, and it's personal. Some people have a vision for what they want to be. And I heard someone in the room earlier say they were a better mother because they were a better worker. Was that Linda Henry that said that, I think? I think she did. And I feel the same way. I think I'm a better mom because I work. But that doesn't mean that's right for everyone, and that doesn't mean it's a choice that people make. Sometimes life happens to you. Sometimes you get sick. Sometimes you're caring for, elder parents, and you're suddenly put on the sidelines. So the priorities really do shift, and I think that the way I look at it is, it's really, life is about a series of chapters, especially if you're a woman. My second company was all about empowering girls, called the Beacon Street Girls. And so each book had, I think, 20 chapters. And I feel like my life's had a lot of chapters. And so you have to think about what your priorities are at the time. And your priorities shift based on the ages and stages and other things that happen outside. So I think that's the first thing. And then I think the last thing I want to say is there are ebbs and flows, and having it all is unrealistic. And we all hear about the word balance. There's no balance. It's what you want to put pressure on and lean into at one point, and then what you want to lean into another point. And then how do you make it all work? And in these days, it's really hard to not make it work by working because it's so expensive to live. So it's all a complex situation.
Great. Okay. I think we got it all figured out, right? So, obviously, the pandemic has had a huge impact on the workplace and on parents, and it's done a number on the well-being of people, particularly moms, right, who often neglect taking care of themselves. So, Leslie, can you talk a little bit about what the pandemic has done to us?
Absolutely. Maybe just to start by show of hands, how many of you feel like you're doing a good job of taking care of yourselves? Okay, there we go.
That's actually not so bad.
I have a study of over 3,700 parents, 97% of whom are women, and 79% say they're doing terribly or not as well as usual at self-care. And it's worse now than it was in spring of 2020. And a lot of the themes that have come up in this conference, right? Moms are typically the chief medical officer, the chief operating officer, the chief household officer. So if you think about what was destabilized in the pandemic, childcare, elder care, health care. I mean, how many of you have had to book a specialist for one of your kids recently, right? Or for yourself? How long did you wait? Did you have to make it a part-time job to find one, right? It's a whole thing. So the more infrastructure that's broken in our society, the gap filling often comes down to our time and mental energy. So we are like swimmers trying to shave a few seconds off of our time every day, and we are often shaving off self-care to be able to make space for all of the other work that's really critical to our families and to our sense of identity.
Right. I mean, and the pandemic in a way also shed a huge light on the needs of working parents, right? Like we all saw how important childcare was. I feel like now parents, men and women alike, are less likely to hide their parenting responsibilities. You know, they're not shy about leaving the office at 4 o'clock to pick up their kids if they need to, which is a good thing, you know, and it increased the acceptability of working from home, which gave everyone a lot more flexibility, and you know, helped with the commute. You know, you're spending less time in the car. Of course, all these like return to office mandates are making it more difficult now to break that nice routine and go back. And I just wondered if you guys had any other thoughts about other ways that the pandemic kind of changed caregivers in particular when it comes to work, like different impacts it had, both good and bad.
One thing that I think is that, you know, when everybody started on Zoom and Teams and, you know, you were booked every single minute and kids were running in and out, it just humanized the workplace more. And then you got to make relationships with people you worked with more personally. So I kind of think in a way it broke down some barriers, and maybe work became less formal because work was in your family room, in your kitchen, in your living room. And I think that was actually a good thing, because then if you're more humanizing work, you're seeing people as people and the whole person versus just what you're doing in your job.
Yeah, it did seem like bosses were realizing, even though they know in their head, like, oh, these people have lives and families, but when you actually see the kids or the dog run across the screen, I think it made a difference. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, as an advocate for workplace flexibility for the past 20 years, the pandemic really flipped that switch and allowed us to have a real live experiment to show that people can get work done when they're working at home and working flexibly, and something that, you know, we could not have possibly tracked without that event. And some organizations have really taken that to heart, and they have a new working model, you know, bringing people in at certain times so that they can be in community and make those connections, but allowing people more flexibility. And then on the other extreme, you know, you have those return to office mandates, which are often not done very strategically, short-sighted, not recognizing the gaps in the care ecosystem, or even if they have enough desks for people to sit at where they come in to be able to do their business. Right. So, you know, there was that glimmer of hope, but we do see some organizations kind of retrenching back to the old ways.
I'll add on the positive side, because I mostly work with employers in addition to the mom side of my work. Mental health care, support for mental health care, destigmatizing the need for mental health care, and improving subsidies for mental health care. I see the pandemic as having really opened that whole discussion in a completely new way that's been incredibly positive for families.
Yeah, that's good. Mental health, that's a good one. And Jennifer, you were mentioning that employers are starting to do more now, not just supporting new moms, but as we're talking about, you know, mental health care and child care, that sort of thing. But you said also embracing the whole range of caregiving, right? Like starting a family all the way up to elder care?
Absolutely. The organizations that we work with are providing not only support for, but funding for fertility services for people who want to grow their families, some in the realm of $25,000 to help people have a child if they're not able to in other ways, or if they're a same-sex couple who really are required to use some creative ways of building their families. We see some support for college coaching. When you have a teenager going through that process, it's extremely stressful for both the child and the parent, and some organizations are stepping up to provide that type of service so families can access tutors, advisors for choosing a college, and help with essays and so on. And then on the other end, with elder care, helping to find providers, care navigators. The elder care system is extremely costly, extremely complex, and people often don't come forward and say that they have elder care responsibilities. That's part of the hidden workforce of caregivers. But we're hearing more organizations really recognizing the amount of stress that's on those caregivers and trying to help them guide through that very complicated and costly system.
And I think you said there were lots of studies that are now being done. There was always studies on how being a parent affects your job, but now there's more research being conducted on this full spectrum. Like you're talking about fertility and postpartum depression, like the whole gamut of raising a family.
Yes. We partner with academic scholars both at Boston College, but other universities around the country, Wake Forest and Harvard, SMU in Texas, and there are many work family researchers who are studying these issues and trying to bring to light kind of the under-discussed issues. The fertility journey is very stressful both physically and emotionally, and in terms of the time that you need to dedicate to that. So we're learning more about what kind of support can be offered to people at that phase. Recognition of postpartum anxiety and depression as significant issues that affect not only the family, but the person and the individual in the workplace as well. And then the studies that I mentioned on working dads, really trying to engage men more in the conversation about parenting, about caregiving, and encouraging them to step forward and be vocal in the workplace and say they need to take that time to access the parental leave that's being offered to them so they can be a true caregiving partner.
Yeah, and I know I've done some stories on benefits that employers are offering, including like putting miscarriages in with family leave and allowing people to take time off for that, which never used to exist, which is crazy, right? And so it's nice to see the starting to recognize more that being a parent or being a caregiver is not just having a kid in school, right? Leslie, I wonder if you could talk about the DEI backlash and how it's kind of making it tough for mothers in the workplace, especially for women of color. And we had talked about how this climate kind of affects people's ability to advocate for themselves.
Okay, so where do I start? It's a whole thing. Well, I think first, it's probably worth noting that part of the challenge that women have is a lack of social power and often a lack of seniority in the workplace, right? So we're represented in the workplace, but not generally at the highest levels of leadership, which is why women are less likely to raise their hands when they're struggling, or to ask for help or support, or even to advocate for ourselves. And lots of studies, show that there's real backlash in some cases if you do. So with the attacks on DEI, sadly, I think what's happening and will continue to happen is that more mothers, more women, and particularly women of color, people who are disabled, people who are LGBTQ+, right, people from other historically marginalized groups in addition to identifying as female, will just self-silence more. They will raise their hands less. And if you are in that circumstance, if you don't have the psychological safety at work, advocate for yourself through a group. If there's an employee resource group, if there's a supportive group of parents, and they don't necessarily have to be female parents, they don't have to be other moms, but just work through your asks as a group if you feel that that's how you need to get what you need, but you don't feel the psychological safety is there to ask for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think we don't think too much about moms being a group of people that might be, need some of this extra protection. Well, lots of mothers like the idea of taking a career break when their kids are young, but it can be difficult to get back on track. Addie, can you talk about the challenges of taking time off and what can help women to come back without losing ground?
Sure. Well, there's probably, have anybody here taken a career break? Is everybody a working mother? Okay. So it's pretty prevalent as evidenced by the data, and it's a real challenge. I created this company 12 years ago because I felt that why should all this talent be sitting on the sidelines and women not be able to get back in? They invested in their education, in their careers, and they made some headway and actually were managing people, and then suddenly something happened that either took them off the working wheel or they were forced off the working wheel. So I feel like, the whole mantra of my mission has been a career break doesn't have to be a career breaker. Now, when I had my first daughter, there was no internet. I'm sounding like a dinosaur here, but there was no internet. There were no at-home PCs. You had a BlackBerry if you were lucky, if you were working in a certain level in an organization. But if you had made a choice to stay at home, forget it. You were off, and then you were done, kind of in a way. And I just felt like that there was just too much invested and too much potential that was just sitting out there that wasn't realized. But in today's world, you can hang out your own shingle. It might cost $50, not even, to put up something on the internet and say you're going to be an entrepreneur or do solar practice or do some consulting or have a project. But it wasn't like that. But now you do have the choice, and you can make a choice like that. I've seen, and I've lived a long set of experiences here and seen a lot of women make different choices. There are a lot of choices versus stopping out completely. And I would say that if you're thinking about that, there are other options, because it is super hard to get back. And when you do get back, you're not going to get back at the same level that you were before. But in today's world, and I've known this, people have taken jobs in other companies that are lesser jobs with a lesser title that has no travel and less responsibility because they're a single mother and they want to be home for their kid. And at that moment, that's their priority. I've seen other people go to their management and say, I need to do less. I'm not going to be in a role that's going to generate income, but is there something that's more staff related so that I can kind of still keep my foot in the organization? And all those choices are really good choices. If you do take time off, which of course I created this whole company for that, I'd say when you do decide to go back in intentionally, make sure that you do it in a way that provides the support, the community, and it's not just about your tech skills and what your tech skills are. I saw a quote from somebody recently that said, it's really not the skills. If you're smart, you're smart, and you're always going to be creative and innovative. It's the fear of, can I do it? And do I have the confidence to show up well? And so make sure that when you're thinking about going back, you have all those supports around you so you can be successful. Because it's not just about you, it's about the environment you're going into, the manager you're reporting to, the job and the environment. So it's complex. We've learned a lot, and I feel like you shouldn't be afraid if that's a choice you want to make. And it's all about where you want to be and what priorities you have at different times. And I would say, I personally became an entrepreneur because I had a young child and I didn't trust the childcare then. There was not Bright Horizons, there weren't all these things, and everything that was on the news was these childcare providers and bad things happening to children because it wasn't regulated back then. And so I made a choice and then 3 months into having my daughter, I started a company, which leveraged part-time moms who were at home that were tech savvy to give them something flexible to do, selling educational software. So who knows? But you have a lot of choices, and career breaks are challenging, but I think it's, You know, understanding your priorities and understanding that what you do now doesn't have to be forever, and it doesn't have to define you forever. But you do need to put the supports around you so that you can, when you are ready, if you do take a break, you can go back and be successful. And we all know that women are amazing. So we have so much to give, and we just need the opportunity.